Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of True Avatars, a queer video game podcast. I am your host, Zoe Wild, and my pronouns are she, her. I am a trans feminine gamer and YouTuber. I want to thank everyone who listened to the first episode last week, and I just want to say that I am doing my very best to navigate the bewildering concept that is an RSS feed to get this podcast on more platforms, and I want to thank everyone for their patience. And today we have our guest, or my guest, I should say. His name is Graeme, and he is one of my oldest friends, and we both knew each other well before we came out of the closet. Graeme is a gay man with pronouns he, him. Welcome, Graeme.
Thank you for having me, Zoe.
So, Graeme, just to kind of break the ice, I wanted to ask what you've been playing lately.
Well, in what little time I have to play, I'm kind of juggling multiple games right now. When I need something quick, I'm slowly working my way through Super Mario Odyssey. But for my obsession, it's right now Octopath Traveler 2, plus I've been replaying Kingdom Hearts 1 just for a little kick of nostalgia, so I'm obviously juggling multiple games all the time.
Same here. I've also been playing multiple games, and I just want to say that Super Mario Odyssey, I'm not sure how far into it you are, but that is one of my favorite games of all time, and it made me, I didn't play Breath of the Wild at launch, so the whole time I had my Switch, I was just kind of dabbling in Mario Kart that first year. And then once Mario Odyssey came out, I was like, okay, the Switch is definitely like a console of the ages. I finally figured out, I was like, this is my Breath of the Wild. And then I played Breath of the Wild later and realized it's 10 times better than Mario Odyssey. And that's no disrespect to Mario Odyssey. That just says how good Breath of the Wild is.
I still have to get to that one.
Well, when you have a lot to play, and there is a lot to play, I can't blame you for not starting Breath of the Wild. It's a beast. It's huge.
I think one thing we have in common is a massive backlog that we both are like, oh, are we going to get to that eventually? And we're like, yes! In time.
Yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. I've stopped buying games that I'm not going to play right away, though, so I hope that helps with the backlog numbers. Because you'll see a game on sale and you're like, oh, I really want to play that, and it's a really good price, and I don't want to pay that later. So anyway, but yeah, I hope you can get through some more games soon. And I just wanted to say, because I kind of want to go on a little bit of a rant, because I've been playing The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, so the new 2D Zelda that came out this week, and it's actually the first new 2D Zelda game in 11 years. I don't count Triforce Heroes, even though Triforce Heroes is a fine game. It's decent, but it's definitely not a traditional 2D Zelda because it's multiplayer, so it's more like Four Swords. Whereas the last game that came out was A Link Between Worlds on the 3DS, I think November 2013. 2013, yes. And I think it came out the same, maybe it was 2014. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is it's been 10 years at least. So I've been waiting a while for a new 2D Zelda. And I'm really glad they made Zelda a playable character. It's refreshing.
And I think it's something that the fan base has been asking for a long time. We've gotten some tastes of it in, Age of Calamity, where you had Zelda as a playable character in two different forms. And I think that people have been waiting for more of a mainline game to play as, the titular character, because everyone's like, Legend of Zelda, that's about Zelda, right? It's like, well, actually, there's this character Link over here.
I think I'm guilty of that before I played Zelda for the first time, too. I was like, well, that's Zelda, right? Just like Samus is called Metroid. So, but anyway, as I've been playing it, it's really, really charming. It's got the same art style as Link's Awakening, which is a really cute-looking game. It's got, the, I want to call it a bokeh effect, but it's not. It's more of a tilt shift where the lens is blurred at the top and bottom, so it makes it really look like it's a scale model. So it's really pretty. The performance is fine. I know people have been complaining about the performance and the frame rate. The performance doesn't bother me despite some obvious frame dips. It's a Nintendo console and a Nintendo game. I kind of deal with the frame drops at this point. But my issue with the game is actually the combat. And I'm going to try not to spoil too much because I'm not very far into the game anyway. I'm only past the first dungeon, just into the second. But Zelda can't fight on her own. They didn't give her a bow and arrow. She doesn't have a sword. She has a way to use a sword, and I won't spoil exactly how that works. But she has a way to use a sword, but it's got I'll just say it's got a timer on it. So you can use it for 20 seconds, and it depletes like magic did in A Link to the Past. So then after you've depleted that, good luck finding more of the particles that fill up your gauge again. So basically you have to have Zelda send out enemies against other enemies. And it's like playing Pokemon in a way, where you have to figure out okay, which monster is going to fight best against the monster that is trying to kill you. And you send out the monster, and sometimes the monster, sometimes the monster at all doesn't work. It's not the right monster to send out. which is like one thing. It's like having type advantages without knowing what they are, where Pokemon teaches you that. Zelda doesn't tell you like, hey, this attacker might be good this monster might be really good against a different monster. But then sometimes the monster doesn't attack. You'll send it out against another monster, and the monster will just kind of stand there. Like I sent out a Dark Nut. Didn't send out Batman. I sent out Dark Nut, which is like the classic like knight that you find in a dungeon. It takes a few hits to kill, right? And it's also got like a sword or an axe or something. And Dark Nut is like the most powerful monster I've currently acquired as my Echo. And I sent it out, and he just kind of stands there. Maybe he'll charge up to swing. Maybe. So even though Zelda Echoes of Wisdom is like a really, really well done game, so far I love it. I find the combat exhausting is all I really want to say.
It very much makes Zelda like a pet class character, which can get really annoying sometimes when you have to manage how many echoes you have cycling through them all. And the gameplay footage I've seen of Echoes of Wisdom does really highlight the puzzles more than the combat. Combat is kind of an afterthought. It's always like, look at all these things you can do with echoes you collect, and you can move things around, and you can make it bigger, make it smaller, etc., etc. And then it's like, oh, and combat. Cool. Maybe give at least a scepter swing or something. Like, maybe not an effective move, but like, if I were playing this game, I would never use the sword move because I'm very much a resource hoarder. And if it's like mana, it's like, well, I need to save it for a time and I'll need it. I can be in the final boss of a video game and be like, well, I can't use my mega elixir because what if I need it later? It's the final boss. Use it. Burn it. You're done. And I'm like, nah, I might need it. What about post game? What about DLC? I might need it later.
Yeah, or you fail the boss and you've used your resources and they don't give them back to you in some cases.
Oh yes. That's the Colosseum in Kingdom Hearts. If you use those items in it, if they are gone, and if you die, well, sucks to be you.
Yeah. Also, I play the same way. I'm a resource hoarder, especially because I'm like, well, there's going to be a harder boss later. But yeah, I just think, and also too, my other problem with the Echoes is that like I find myself using like 2 or 3 of them mainly. Like I use the bed for stairs and I use the trampoline to hop onto ledges. Because Zelda, she can't jump as high as Link can, and they kind of point that out in the game, and it's just kind of like, I get they're trying to make you use echoes, but also you could have just made the jump just a little bit better. Just because she's a woman doesn't mean she can't jump as well as Link. Like, what do you... Anyway, it's neither here nor there. It's still a great game. I still highly recommend it for anyone who's listening and maybe on the fence. Like, it's still really good. If you're worried about performance, there's nothing I can really do. I don't think Nintendo's going to patch the game to make it run any better, because I think I think even the developers at this point can tell that they need the Switch too, so they can develop games better, or at least make them perform better, rather, because the gameplay is still there. Like, it's still a Nintendo game. It's still polished. It just needs some frame increase. Anyway, let's move on to the news. So this week in the news, there was a state of play, and we're not going to go through every game in the state of play, but we're going to talk about a few games. Last week we spoke about Dragon Age, the Veilguard, and they did show off some gameplay. And I was just showing Graeme the gameplay, and I was wondering, Graeme, what were your thoughts on the gameplay we watched from the state of play?
So previous to this, I have played at least bits of every Dragon Age, like at least the mainline games, so 1, 2, and Inquisition. And I find that the gameplay is much faster paced with the Veilguard. It's more dynamic. It seems like it's a lot more happening in the moment, and the movement in general is just more seamless. There's less of a positioning, because Dragon Age to me has always had a kind of MMORPG style of play to it, where there's a bit of pausing, there's a bit of your character swings, and there's a bit of a delayed reaction from the effect happening, and it kind of is a little bit, takes you a little bit out of the gameplay, but it also allows you to strategize more. And this one actually reminds me more of a Mass Effect game. And
same developer, right?
Yeah, same developer, BioWare. And so I'm seeing a lot more like, oh, the magic is even looking a lot like the adept skills in Mass Effect. And I'm getting a lot of the influences from this like faster pace shooter game, as compared to, normally a more relaxed paced fantasy game. So I'm encouraged with what I see, and it does look fun. And the graphics, of course, look fantastic.
Yeah, I think I might actually play it, especially since it's so queer inclusive. It's not a game that ever spoke to me before, but I have a couple friends that when I was in university, and I think I said this last week, they took off like a whole week to play it. Like I didn't see them. Like they weren't playing together. They were playing separately, but like I just didn't see them for a week when the game came out, and I didn't even before that moment. And again, I hadn't been too into video games at the time. Like I kind of fell out of them right before university, but I didn't realize how big the franchise was. That it was followed with so much love that people would take time out of their day, out of their week to like play this game without going to work or going to school. I know with Dragon Quest games in Japan, like on release day for those, it's a national holiday there, and it kind of felt like that at university with Dragon Age, I should say.
So many dragons, all the dragon games,
every dragon game.
And I can say, like, I understand it with Inquisition. It did a lot of fun things that hadn't been done in Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2. But I would say that it's so big and there's so much to do that I would get exhausted playing. It was also one of the first games I played when I got my PS4. So it was very much a big deal for me, and I played it a lot, but I also just got weary of it. I don't think I ever finished Inquisition because I just like got bored. And that's a big problem with me, especially with BioWare games, is I get to about the halfway point where there's always some kind of twist where the big bag will throw a curveball. You have to usually relocate into this bigger, shinier HQ, and then you get access to getting more characters or, advanced classes. Like, you get more options to play with. And at that point is usually the time where I'm like, and I'm done. And then I find something else to play and I never go back to it. And it's kind of sad, but at the same time, like, it's just, to me, it doesn't hold my attention. These games don't hold my attention the way that more narrative-based games do, like a Final Fantasy game. Like, I'm a Final Fantasy fanatic. I love that franchise. I've played so many of them, and I very much am excited about, the possible news of like a remake or remaster of Final Fantasy IX. And it's just, Dragon Age just doesn't do it for me, so I'm hesitant to pick up Veilguard because I just know that I'm going to get half of the gameplay out of it, and then I'm going to move on to something else.
That's fair. I mean, I think for me, if I was in your shoes, I would ask myself if that half of the game is worth the price of admission. But also, again, if you're listening to this podcast and you're queer, and queer people are disproportionately more likely to be less fortunate, I recommend waiting for a sale. I don't like saying that, especially for indie games, but I think for a big AAA game like Dragon Age, like, wait for a sale. Like, if you're only going to play 20, 30 hours and you spend $20 on it, I think that might be okay if you're okay with the 30 hours you're going to play.
And if you're willing to wait, I've seen Dragon Age Inquisition on, like, dirt cheap sales sometimes. So, like, this is a game that will go on sale. Just be a little patient. So if you don't have the ability to get it right at release, you'll be fine. If you have to choose between a game that you're excited about, it's maybe a little cheaper or like less expensive, versus Veilguard, which I know is going to have that AAA price tag to it. I think you can rest assured that if you wait a little bit, you will be able to get either a used copy or just a new copy on sale eventually. Which, depending on where you buy your games, if they allow like trade-in discounts as well, like you can, or credits, you can put that towards it as well.
Absolutely. So just to speed things up a little bit, I spent a lot of time on the news last week, so I'm going to blow through a couple headlines super quick with you, and we're going to stop at one of them because I think one of them is ridiculous and amazing and so weird, and like I just don't even know how to process it. But first off, Fantasia Neo Dimension has a release date, so this is the game from Final Fantasy creator, whose name is spacing on me right now. Graeme, if you remember, please chime in. But the creator of the original Final Fantasy games is developing this game for Apple Arcade, which is now coming to Switch, PS4, PS5. I think it's coming to PS4, but anyway, it's definitely coming to Switch, which is where I'm going to play it. And all I'll say about this game is that it's got a December 5th release date. So if anyone who, like me, was waiting to hear about the news of when it was coming out, it's December 5th. Ghost of Yotei was announced, and this is Ghost of Tsushima 2. It's got a female protagonist, which has some people up in arms, but most people are very excited about it because it's set a few hundred years later. It's got a female protagonist. The person playing the protagonist is super cool and rad and awesome, and I recommend you check them out. It's got gorgeous looking visuals. Again, I can't remember if we saw any gameplay in the trailer, but the cinematics at the very least are very, very pretty. absolutely gorgeous, and it's supposed to come out next year. And then our other headline before we get into this really wacky one is that there's a PS1 style horror game that kind of calls upon the old Silent Hill games stylistically and visually. It's called Fear the Spotlight, and it comes out in I think 2 or 3 weeks, which is pretty soon. And basically, you're a girl in looks like an old abandoned school or maybe an abandoned office building, and you have to avoid these monsters that beam spotlights out of their faces. It looks super creepy, but it also definitely looks like a PS1 game. Like if you told me this was a remastered game from the PS1 era, I would believe you.
And it's also very interesting to see that this style, like the style of PS1 games, is really making a comeback, and it's really making, like, I see people modding Elden Ring to look like if it was on PS1, and it's almost like also the callback to pixel art RPGs that is, Octopath Traveler was a homage to, and Triangle Strategy as well. You're seeing a lot of, the callbacks to these early games, but with more polish to it. So it's really fun to see games that I remember from when I was a kid, seeing like gameplay of, the old Silent Hill or the old Resident Evil games, and seeing that this is now the style that they're making horror in, because there was something distinctly horrific about this jagged, non-naturalistic movement that was just the technological limitations of the day, but it really works for the horror genre.
I agree. I would love to see more of this, but I'm going to check out Fear the Spotlight first to see how much I really want more of those games first. Because it looks like it'll be... I don't know how much it's going to cost, but I don't think it's going to cost a lot because it looks like a digital-only release at the moment. And it's also a last-minute announcement, so these kinds of games tend to be a little cheaper. But then the WTF-style announcement we have here is that in the middle of the State of Play, they kind of just like dropped this and left and said that Keanu Reeves is going to be playing a version of Shadow in Sonic Shadow Generations. And I have a million questions, and we would spend 3 hours on this podcast just talking about this. But I'm like, how did they get the money to pay Keanu Reeves for a video game DLC that like I think costs like $5 or $10 maybe? I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But I don't know. Did you hear about this? That he's going to be in the game?
I did not hear he was going to be in the game, but I've been seeing a lot of comparisons like of, associating Keanu Reeves with Shadow, and I'm like, you know what? I can see it. Absolutely. And also, I feel like Keanu Reeves, from all I've heard about who he is as a person, he seems just like super chill and down. He'd be like, yeah, that sounds cool. Like, I'll do it. Sure. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just pitched it to Mr. Reeves and he was like, sure.
Well, so the one thing I should mention, if anyone who hasn't heard about this, is that he is playing Shadow in the movie that's coming out. But it's one thing to cast someone in like a $200 million, I don't know what the budget of the Sonic 3 is, by the way, but I have to assume it's somewhere in the $100 to $200 million range, especially after the first two were so successful. But getting him for the movie is like one thing. It's kind of like, it feels like almost like stunt casting. But then to say like, oh, by the way, we're also going to throw him in the DLC, and like I don't even think they got Keanu Reeves for the Matrix demo, which I know was a free demo, but like I don't think Keanu Reeves was ever in any Matrix games. Again, please don't quote me on that. I'm assuming no. But given the budget of like movie tie-in games from 20 years ago, like anyway, I could ramble about this for a while. I just think it's so weird. It's very cool. I'm happy about it. But maybe we'll see more celebrities play their video game counterparts someday.
I mean, I would love that, because especially if they create iconic characters on screen and then there's still a tie-in with the video game, I think that could drive the game sales up, because people who are fans of these performers will have like, oh, there's more content with them. I know I'm that way. If I like someone, I seek out their work. And it could also just, I don't know, it's just, there wouldn't be that disconnect, because nothing's more dissatisfying than when I play a game that's either has a tie-in or inspired by a movie and like the voice is different. And it's like, oh, but the voice in the movie was so good. And the voice on this is just, it's not the same. So it's like a record skip to me.
That's fair. I mean, I still really, really want Ryan Reynolds to show up in or any Pokemon game. Maybe in Gen 10 or Legend ZA. Moving on super quickly to finish up the State of Play, because we have a couple of other weird headlines. Lego Horizon Adventures was discussed again, and I still think it's very, very weird that this game is coming to Switch, and also that it got a Lego game at all of every Sony franchise.
Listen, the Lego games are great. I can't deny that, like, Lego Star Wars, Lego DC, Lego Marvel, these are games that my nephew plays a lot of. These are games that, I've had fun with. And it is really like a quirky game that, like, a lot of them have no right being as good as they are. Like, it's almost one of those Okay, a Lego game is this good? Sure, like I'll give it that. But does every franchise need a Lego adaptation? And I've never played the Horizon games. Like I have Horizon Zero Dawn on my backlog. It's on my system waiting for me. Like the complete edition as well, so all the DLC as well. And it's just one of those games that I just keep putting off because first of all, it seems so big and insurmountable, kind of like The Witcher 3. I'm also putting that one off because it just when something is as large as it is, Persona 5 Royal as well, it just seems like, ooh, how badly do I want to get into this? And my big question, will it hold my attention?
Well, for me, I did finish it. I did not play the DLC, but I did play the main story. I'm bad at video games. I just want to preface this for everyone out there. I'm bad at unless I'm really into something or something clicks with me mechanically where I understand it and I'm like suddenly invested in the strategy of it or like the way the buttons press feel good. Like I can't explain it better than that, but I was bad at this game. Like I was really, really bad. I played it on story difficulty. So I'm sure everyone out there is like, well, you played on even baby ass baby mode than baby ass baby mode. And I was still dying all the time. And I didn't find the open world interesting enough to go explore it because I had just finished playing Breath of the Wild. And while at the time I was drawing comparisons visually in my head, once I started playing Horizon Zero Dawn, I was like, okay, these games are nothing alike. That said, in Breath of the Wild, you can kind of go anywhere and do anything, and I never felt that freedom from the open world in this game. And I think that did a number on me. So that the combat not clicking with me and being bad at it, by the way, and that made me not enjoy it as much. However, I did like the story, but I didn't like the story enough to go sit through the second game.
Also, I think that Horizon Zero Dawn came out at a time where open world sandbox games were very, very popular, and we had a lot of them. You know, on the tailwind of the Infamous series that kind of made it popular and contributed to it. You also had games like Prototype that did the same sort of thing as Infamous, setting it in a city. You have Breath of the Wild, you have
GTA.
GTA. Like, open world games have a very large fan base, and Horizon Zero Dawn appeals to that. I don't know. I'm a JRPG player predominantly. I like my narrative. If it doesn't have a good story and compelling characters, I don't care. Because like good gameplay, I can enjoy a lot of different gameplay mechanics. I can enjoy a lot of different styles of games. It's really what is the story you're telling me. When people complain about the story's too linear, it's like I got news for you. All your favorite movies have a linear story. It may be all mixed around and out of order. But a lot of stories, if you're like, even in this open world, you still have to go to a certain place at a certain time to progress the story. Therefore, it's an open world, but you're still following a linear story. So get off my case about non-linear games. Sometimes I just want to have a good story that makes me cry. That's all I'm looking for.
Honestly, for me, even sometimes I want my hallway simulator. I want it to lead me down the exact path where I need to go. If I'm playing a hallway simulator where like there's only one clear path and they take me on a like branching path briefly to go get a collectible, my brain goes, I like it has to, if it's not an open world game, I want a hallway. I don't want like this halfway between the two things because I'm just like, oh god, I'm gonna get lost. I'm gonna go look for this collectible, or the collectible's not down there and I actually missed the collectible and I went and progressed the story. Now I can't get back to the collectible. But in the interest of moving forward, Graeme, I'm going to cut you off because we're going to keep moving forward with the news. I'm so sorry. Next time, I'll give you the last laugh, okay? I'm just going to say quickly that there is some free Astrobot DLC coming, and I do think this news will be relevant to you, Graeme, because I've been hearing rumors that even though this free Astrobot DLC is coming and they're adding new bots, like new Sony franchises, characters from Sony franchise and Sony affiliated franchises, there is nothing on the cards from Square Enix, which includes, to my disappointment, Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, and Barret as bots in the game, which is a little disappointing because even most of those characters in the DLC, in the game itself got their own levels. So there could have been a Final Fantasy themed level. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I've been seeing Final Fantasy kind of disappear from crossover franchises recently. A lot of people were very disappointed, myself included, that there was no Final Fantasy characters in Kingdom Hearts 3. They just did not show up, and after they were featured in the previous installments in the franchise, to the point where like Kingdom Hearts 1, when that came out, I was like 6 or 7, because it was like 2002. And I did play it upon release, and this was the first I got introduced to Squall, Aerith, Cloud. With Kingdom Hearts 2, we got Tifa. this is the first time I saw a lot of these characters. Like I heard about, but this was like, oh, I'm seeing them, and it's really cool. And Yuffie's in there too, and like
No, Yuffie's my favorite.
this was a great introduction to these characters that made me want to go and explore the games they came from, and that's what got me to looking up Final Fantasy. So it is disappointing that they're not showing up in Astrobot, especially because Astrobot's a game that appeals to a younger generation of gamers, and that could also introduce the younger generation to masterpiece games like Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, any other Square Enix. Square Enix has a long history of creating like knockout titles. Nier Automata.
Yeah, that was one of the other characters I've seen people bring up is she's not going to be in the Astrobot game either.
And that kind of, it's funny she's an android.
Yeah, it's true.
It would be honestly the perfect leap.
Also, I don't think I said the character's name, but I think the character's name is 2B, correct?
2B is the like main one, and then there's 9S who is the companion. So
they'd probably both be in it if they were going to add those characters.
Yeah, those are the two most famous characters from Nier Automata. So yeah, they would be in it. Do you know what characters they did announce to be coming over?
They did announce them, and I've already forgotten what they are.
That's okay. We don't need to get into that. But just you have.
I think one of them was the character from Stellar Blade that just came out, and I think the only reason that character is DLC is because the game is relatively new.
Yeah, and that's kind of a pretty well established trend in the video game industry. Is there's something new. We're going to put it as DLC, or we're going to put it into another game to kind of cross promote.
It's just wild to me that Sony paid. I assume Sony paid, and a lot of people assume this too. That Sony paid a lot of money to have Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy be console exclusive to PlayStation, at least at launch, and that these characters, they couldn't reach an agreement to get Cloud, even just the Final Fantasy VII characters alone. Don't even count Sora, don't even count 2B, don't even count, I don't know, people from Life is Strange for all I care, any Square Enix, even Dragon Quest characters, like the hero. But like, at the very least, like I would have expected Cloud, especially since his Buster Blade is in the Astrobot Astro's Playroom, so the tech demo that came with the base PS5. It came pre-installed. The Buster Sword, it's the Buster Sword or Buster Blade. I'm a bad Final Fantasy VII fan.
Buster Sword.
The Buster Sword. But the Buster Sword is in there, but they don't want to pay for the license to Cloud, and it's crazy to me. Or they couldn't reach an agreement on how these characters look as robots. But it's just like, I promise you, the only people that care about the image of these characters as robots is Square Enix. People playing the game are just happy to see their favorite characters. I promise you.
Yeah, and it's really kind of funny to me that the sword is there, which is going to evoke Cloud. It's one of the most iconic swords in video games, to the point where people are like, oh yeah, the guy with the big sword. People know the Buster Sword more than they know Cloud sometimes. And isn't that funny, just associating a character with the size of his sword?
All right, well, we have two more news stories that we're going to touch upon, maybe three if we have time for one more headline. But in California, they're introducing a new law, I guess it's a new law. Anyway, don't come after me, legal people. But anyway, they've introduced a bill that says the legislation will force digital storefronts to tell customers they're just getting a license to use the digital media rather than suggesting that they actually own it. So, for example, you bought a game on the PlayStation Network. Any game. Let's say you're about to buy the new Dragon Age on pre-order digitally. Well, great. It's and this has always been the case, but you don't actually own that game. If Sony ever decides that they don't want you to own it, or the rights holder decides that they don't want you to own it, anyone involved with the rights makes it difficult to own. You will not be able to own that game anymore. You will not be able to access that game anymore, which is an issue that runs very deep for a lot of reasons in a lot of different ways. But I think it's good that that these storefronts, and this doesn't just apply to video games, this applies to movies and books and anything else that is not DRM free. You basically be told that, like, hey, you don't actually own this, but you're basically like renting it indefinitely, maybe until we don't want you to have access to it anymore, which is messed up. But I'm curious what your thoughts are.
It's giving gatekeeping stories, and gatekeeping video games are very much like, they still have a lot of negative associations from like previous generations being, having opinions about gamers, which are not accurate anymore. We have a very diverse player base across all platforms, across all genres. And it is a very large part of how we tell stories and how we engage with each other these days. You know, not only with online multiplayer games, but you also have just communities online where people talk about their favorite games. They talk about stories that move them, characters that they're obsessed with. People go dressed up as their favorite characters. This is a way, video games is an entire culture that people engage with. And this is just kind of gatekeeping it so that people in future generations might not have access to some of these games. And I know that there's been a lot of criticism of some companies that restrict their older games and have very, very specific releases. Or
Nintendo
you just
is one. I'm going to throw Nintendo's name out there because I think they need to do better. So
I was definitely alluding to Nintendo for sure, because there's so many big franchises that they hold the IP to, and they're just doing nothing with it. And the fans of these games are crying, begging for any little shred of replayability of these favorite games that could have impacted them. Like, I know in the last episode, Amy Ling brought up Earthbound.
Yeah, we all want Mother 3.
Like, Earthbound is a series that has touched so many people in a profound way, and in some cases made people fall in love with the narrative aspect of video games that can touch people's hearts and tell stories that are uncomfortable and big, but put it in a way that is more digestible and interactive. And I don't like the idea that there's this threat that can be taken away from you, because that's a restriction on the freedom of speech and expression. And there's also just the aspect of the free market being I paid for the use of this, the kind of indefinite renting. Yes, of course, the mother company owns the rights to this game, but you are buying the license to play your copy of that game at home, to bring it home, and it is yours. This is kind of why, and I know they could affect this with physical copies, but this is why I love physical copies more than digital, because I have a lot more just security of self. That it's well, I bought this. I have this physical token that shows I bought this. And I would much rather have the disc that I can put into my system, which is also why when I bought my PS5, I had to get the disc drive version, because to me, I've had PlayStation consoles since the PlayStation 2. I need my disc drive. It's nostalgic for me. And I know one day it's going to be digital exclusive, but this law really casts a shadow on that. It's we're going more towards digital and digital exclusive, digital only content and systems, and I'm just not a fan of the fact that it can be taken from you so easily, because there's so many moving parts that you, the gamer, aren't aware of. And I guess it's good that they're making us aware of this, but
yeah, well, my point is that I think this is a good step in the right direction. I don't think this law is a bad thing. That said, a real law that they could enact, because when they introduce laws like this is the kind of thing that the cookie law from the EU that now affects every website in every country, is that if you do this on one storefront in one country, suddenly every storefront in every country has to do it anyway, because they operate in California. Is that everything should just be DRM free. I think that's what needs to be legislated somewhere in the world. I feel like the EU will probably be before California if it happens at all, but just DRM is basically the license, that's the thing that says you don't own this. It's a little piece of code that's attached to everything that you buy digitally that says well, it's not really your file. You have to use this in our ecosystem, in our walled garden. You have it, but you don't really own it. It's their way to revoke it from you at any time. I know that music at one point, a couple decades ago, was finally made DRM free. So now when you do buy music, even off Apple, it's yours to keep. You get an MP3 or an AAC file, and it's yours. You don't have to worry about Apple ever revoking it. Now, they might take the song off of the ability to download it off their site without you being able to get it again in any way. But if you still have that file, you don't have to worry about Apple going, oh, but do you have permission to play that file? So I think we need to move in that direction for movies, for games, for books, any digital content, even PDFs, any digital content that can be purchased should be yours to keep forever. And yes, I know there's issues with piracy and all kinds of other things. But I think if you make things available and affordable and easy to access, then people will be happy enough to pay it, and they'll be less likely to share things, especially big files like video games that are really hard to share anyway. But I'm going to quickly go through a couple pieces of news because they are relevant to things I am interested in. But so The Last of Us Season 2 got a trailer. The first teaser, it's coming next year in 2025. I didn't really see any spoilers in the trailer, although they're hinting at the big twist, obviously. But if you don't know what's going on in that trailer, then they didn't spoil it for you. Um, Last of Us Part 2 is one of my favorite games, and this season is based on that. So I'm very excited to see how they adapt it. I've seen people talking about how they're not sticking to the format of the game, the way the story is told. And I don't think there's enough information. I just want to say, I don't think there's enough information in that trailer to say one way or the other for how the story is going to play out. Because as far as I can tell, the trailer didn't really go past the prologue of the game. And I won't spoil anything else beyond that, but I'll just say the trailer looks good. The season looks good. I'm really, really, really excited about the casting. And the person they cast as Abby needs all the protection in the world because people on the internet are not nice. So be nice. And finally, because we're going to talk about this game a little bit later, I just wanted to say that Stardew Valley 1.6 update is finally coming to consoles. So Concerned Ape has finally gotten the update approved for the next version, basically, of Stardew Valley. It's not a new game; it's just an update to the old version. But it's been available on PC, I think, since the spring. So it's finally coming to consoles. And I play on Switch, so I'm excited. And the date of release is November 4th. So, Graeme, I think we'll take a quick break and we'll come back and we will discuss our segment for the week, which is gay characters and gay relationships in video games, whether they're confirmed, unconfirmed, or completely headcanon. And we're back from our break. And so our subject today is games with gay relationships, or at least implied or unconfirmed or even headcanon relationships, or characters who might be leaning in that direction. So anyway, I kind of made that sound as boring and milquetoast as possible, but I'm going to start with a game that I think a lot of people know, and a lot of people know is queer, is Stardew Valley. So Stardew Valley, for anyone who doesn't know, is a farming sim. Think like Harvest Moon from the 90s and early 2000s, back when it was still Harvest Moon. So basically, like, you move to a town, you build a farm, and you can romance the townsfolk in Stardew Valley. And Stardew Valley is the name of the town, and no matter what gender the character is, so if you pick male or female, there's no non-binary option in the game, but if you pick male or female, that the other characters, you can romance any of them, no matter who they are. And actually, I did when I was researching this a little bit just to get my head around it, because my partner and I, the way we play Stardew Valley, because when we play it together, we're not romancing the villagers so much, or the townsfolk, if you will. But I did see someone on Reddit refer to the characters as quote-unquote farmer sexual, and I thought that was hilarious. But anyway, I know Graeme has some thoughts, so I will pass it over to you.
See, I think that Stardew Valley is a little context of my background. I have a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, and one of my main theories of queer narratives is this notion of writing the world that you want rather than the world that is. And there's absolutely importance in writing the world that is and reflecting on trauma, pain, hardship, overcoming these things. Like, that's very important. But I've also had some wonderful reading and playing experiences where you can write a world where there is no discrimination against queerness, which I really like. And I think Stardew Valley is a perfect example of that because, as you said, you can romance anyone. There's no restriction on who you can romance in this game. So if you want to romance the female-presenting characters or the male-presenting characters, no matter who you've selected as your gender at point of game start. I like that openness, that availability of romance. Like, it's something that just warms my heart. That it creates a very customizable player experience, and that's something that Stardew Valley is always it's been integral in its gameplay, so I like that it translates to its romance options. It's not like, well, you picked a male character at the start, so here are your female options, and maybe one token, like a guy who can swing either way. Or you picked a female, so here are the male options. Like, I like that there's that customizability, just like the rest of the game.
Yeah.
Like, you can choose how you play this game. So do you want to go dungeon crawling? Do you want to do the farm simming? Like, I really like Stardew Valley. I think it gets queer relationships right.
Yeah, and I think too that the characters don't real. I don't think I can't confirm this because I haven't gone so far, but I haven't seen anyone talk about this before. Is that I don't think the characters actually acknowledge that they are in a queer relationship. Like, if you play as a girl and you decide to romance, let's say Abigail, I don't think Abigail acknowledges that it's a queer relationship. I think she just goes with it. Like, I think all the characters just kind of accept that, like, It is a relationship, and almost like they treat it as like genderless, or as I said earlier, like farmer sexual. Like it's just like it just is, which goes back to this like world, this ideal world where queerness is not an issue that you brought up. So
I'm gonna jump in now to talk about a game that I think gets at almost everything wrong about queer relationships.
please.
And it's one we've already brought up. Last episode and this episode. We're going to talk about Dragon Age Inquisition. Because holy fuck. No. Upon reflecting, like when you told me you wanted to talk about queer relationships in video games, this game was one of the first that came to my mind. Because it's one I played where you have multiple romance options. And when I got this game, I got the strategy guide, and it breaks down how to romance all the party members. And even the non-party member characters, every romance option is detailed. And as I was looking, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go for one of the queer options because obviously I'm queer. But as I was, so first of all, the whole context of like there are restrictions based on, whether you pick a male or female character at the start. Some people will just be completely not down. Already, like, compared to the world of Stardew Valley, where there are no restrictions, we've created a strong riff. We're writing the world that we have, which is really funny, because it's a fantasy world. So you can write a fantasy world any which way you want. It's a world with dragons. But we still have stigma around queerness. Cool. I love that. And yes, Dragon Age does a great job. Inquisition has the trans character in it. What is their name? Creme? I think it's Creme. I swear I looked this up. Yes, Creme. And I find that Creme introduced as a character really helps to start having a discourse around a trans identity and answering questions. And in a way, it seems a little blocky, but at the time that the game came out, it was a very forward idea. But
He's actually the first queer. It says he's the first transgender character to appear in a BioWare video game. Okay, I thought I was going to say in a video game in total, and I was like a little sad, but it also would not surprise me at all. But first trans character in a BioWare game. Sorry, go ahead.
So there are a couple of options for queer romance. And so the gay option is Dorian, who is a necromancer, so one of the mage characters you get on your party. And Dorian was the romance option I wanted to go for. But Dorian is one of the most difficult romances to actually follow through because you need to talk to a specific NPC to start a quest when you recruit Dorian, and then the quest doesn't continue until near the end of the game, which is essentially resolving Dorian's daddy issues as far as I'm aware. So I'm like, look, a gay man with daddy issues. Groundbreaking. And there's so many hurdles, it's so easy to miss this romance option. So I was like, okay, that's too much hassle. Then there is one of the rogue characters, Sarah, Sarah is a character who will romance you no matter what gender you pick, so it's pretty open. But there are some restrictions on her. If you choose elf as your race, you cannot romance her, and she will almost actively discriminate against you. I chose an elf character, and as soon as you meet her, and she's like, oh, and you're an elf. Well, I don't think we're going to get along. And I'm like, wow. Also, for context, Sarah is an elf. So it's really funny to see some elf-on-elf discrimination. And I'm like, oh, so many opinions. My MFA is going wild on this one. But Sarah is kind of embodying the super judgmental side of the queer community, which I think is important to talk about, but also just not very flattering. I was not endeared to this character at all. I never had her in my party. I did not level her up at all because I'm like, you're an awful person. Splish splash, your character's trash. Like, Sarah is atrocious as a character. Is just that kind of wackadoodle, wild, free spirit, can't be pinned down person, which I'm like, these are all queer stereotypes that we're putting on this one character. I have opinions about all this, and it's just I'm getting two queer romance options that one is almost inaccessible just because difficulty, and one is just an unbearable character. Then the third is Black Bull, who is another one of the like no matter which gender you pick, you can romance them. So a lovely bisexual option, and also has some nods to the kink community in his sexual predilections. So Black Bull is who I ended up romancing because it was simpler, earlier in the story, and I was like, I genuinely like you as a character. Is also the one who is like, yes, Krem is my boy. He's one of the guys. Period. End of story. Like, is just so affirming and accepting of Krem as a character. I'm like, that's nice. That's how it should be. So Black Bull, gold star. Love that. But the hetero romances within Dragon Age Inquisition are better written, are easier to achieve, and are much more numerous. So when you combine making obvious the heterosexual romance options the path of least resistance, and gatekeeping the queer romance options behind either hard side quests or just like if you pick the wrong race at the start of the game, well, sorry, if you wanted to be a female elf, sorry, you will never romance Sarah. She will just eliminate you as an option before you even like get one word out of your mouth just because you're an elf. So I'm like, I can't like this. I can't like any of this. It's just making queerness the insurmountable difficulty. It's really, the comment this is making is, if you are queer, your life is harder. And that's already so. I don't want that in my video games. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think the issue too is like, I get that they want an element of realism, or the devs just weren't thinking hard enough about it at the time. Because it was 10 years ago, and I know that's really no excuse, but I can hear people now saying like, well, that's what it's like to be queer in real life, so that's how it should be in a video game. And it's just like, if the game is going to force you down that path and make it difficult for you, there should be a warning before you pick, like, hey, do you want your queer romance to be difficult or do you want it to be easy? Give you that choice at the start of the game to like pick how it's going to be. At the very bare minimum, they should give you that option. Unfortunately, obviously, like they decided to pick. I think it should be a utopia. I mean, if you you said it earlier, like you've got a fantasy world, but in this fantasy world, you're still grounded in queer politics and discrimination. It's just kind of like, well, okay. I mean, you can. It's like creating a theme park and then making the theme park have bad, horrible rules. So.
Yeah, it's just. At the time, I was like, I'm so excited about my queer relationship options. And then as I was playing the game, I ended up just picking one of the hetero ones. Because it's like, well, I like her better. And I don't have to jump through a million hoops to get it. So you know what? I'll just do that. It's fine. Like, I just gave up. And that is what Dragon Age Inquisition has me feeling about queer relationships. Just give up. So this is why I say you did almost everything wrong.
Yeah, let's hope the new one is better. I mean, like I said, it's been a decade. I hope the new one is an improvement. They already do have the top. I mean, they had good trans representation, or at least decent trans representation 10 years ago, and they still have good trans masculine representation now with being able to customize your character to have top surgery scars. And I think that's a huge deal for character customization. But again, it's all for naught if you decide to bring all these other politics and discrimination things into your game.
Like, I don't think this is something they would do, but, you know, are you going to make it so that, you have top surgery scars, you're going to get discriminated against? Because that is shitty. That's an awful thing to include in a video game. Especially because, like, as you said on the last episode, that can either be someone putting themselves into the game, or maybe someone who is not trans but has an idea of a character who is, and wants to include that in their role play, in the character they're creating for this world. Like, I do that all the time. Whenever I play a BioWare game, I kind of have an idea of who my character is, and I customize them and create them and pick skills for them in line with that character vision. It's very much like D&D. It's very much like I want to have a flushed out character it can be just another element, which I think is great to include in character customization, because it allows people to insert themselves into their favorite game, which is really ultimately what narratives are for.
I was thinking too, like, if you choose the top series scars, you kind of alluded to this. Like, are the characters going to mention it? Are the characters going to react? Or is it just there for character customization?
Strictly cosmetic.
Yeah. But like, if you're a developer and you're somehow listening to this podcast on episode 2, and you're wondering like, well, okay, it sounds like I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place, because I either put this thing in and it's positive or or people don't acknowledge it, or I put this thing in and it's a commentary and there's like strife around it. There's no right answer. You just have to think about what your game is doing, and you have to make sure that like just if you're in doubt, like talk to a queer person. Like if you're including top surgery scars, like talk to someone who's had top surgery and see what they say. And everyone's going to have a different answer. I have disagreements with queer people on how queer representation should be all the time. So like just because Graeme and I are agreeing on things right now doesn't mean that like what we're saying is like the be all and end all for good queer representation. It's a very fine line and a really hard balance to strike. I just do think sometimes when people are playing their fantasy games, they don't want to bring the discrimination they face out into the real world to have to deal with that when they're fighting dragons. And I think that's just all we're trying to say. But again, it's a really tough balance to strike. I talked last week about how Last of Us Part 2, when you're playing as a certain character and Lev is following you around, he's the transmasculine kid. There's characters in your peripheral auditory space, and you can hear them like in the next room, like you're trying to sneak around them, you can hear them talking about Lev and misgendering him and like saying awful things. And for me, that brings me into the experience because I'm like, holy shit, like this is definitely like, I feel like if we were in a zombie apocalypse, there'd still be the one or two assholes that are like, oh, let's be transphobic because you know what, I still just hate everyone and everything around me.
You know, there's zombies in the streets, but you know what the real threat is? Trans people.
And that's how the real world feels right now. Like we have actual problems and people are still online bitching about the existence of trans women in bathrooms. But someone who is transmasculine might be playing The Last of Us because they're like, oh, I just want to, even though this is a dark, gritty game and there's like commentary about things, like maybe they just want to forget their transness and just play the game. And then they hear this commentary and it's trauma inducing. Like it just dredges up trauma, and there's no trigger warnings when you start the game saying like, hey, there's going to be slurs, hey, there's going to be transphobia. And again, this isn't really a commentary about whether or not you need to have a trigger warning. I'm just saying that it's like a really tough line to walk, and everyone's different for how they react to it. I'm trans feminine, like I'm a trans woman, so maybe that's why the Lev commentary, the stuff with Lev didn't bother me as much. I was also early in my transition. I haven't replayed the game since. Maybe if I play it now, I'll find it really offensive or not accurate, or like there's like, again, it's not super black and white.
And I think back to when I was playing Dragon Age Inquisition 10 years ago, I was very newly out of the closet and still dealing with a lot of insecurities, still dealing with a lot of figuring out my identity, my like who I was. And so to play a game, I was like, oh, I have the option to explore same-sex romance in this digital world,
which is in a lot of ways a safe space, or at least it should feel that way,
especially it's a single player not online game. So like this is literally, you are just by yourself, so you should be able to explore any which way. And I just kept facing roadblocks, and it's like, wow, this is making it really, really, really difficult. And even with, I mentioned Black Bull being a good romance option. In Black Bull's romance, when the main character in Black Bull initially hook up, they get walked in on by like 3 characters who are all like, oh, I mean, like, it's fine, we're cool with it, but like, this is just surprising, we didn't know. And it's like,
oh my god, they make a big deal about the gay sex.
They make a big deal about the gay sex, and I'm just like, can we not? Like, can it just can it just be sex? Can it
just be a nice intimate moment? Like, it doesn't have to be.
I had lunch today. I didn't have gay lunch today. Like, can it just be sex?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like, again, everyone's different. But like, again, if you like, I'm not gonna start talking about my sex life, but when I do things, I'm not thinking like I'm doing this as a trans person. Like, yeah, maybe early when you come out, it feels like novel to you a little bit, but like, there's no reason to make a big thing of it, especially like if in that world for that character, it's just like a Tuesday, then like, even if those people walked in on them and that's how they would actually react, like, do we really need that moment in the game? Like, can't we just let queer people just have this nice moment? Like, is there, I don't know for sure, but I'm maybe you know the answer to this. Like, if there's a hetero sex scene, do people walk in and go, oh, it's, no. Yeah, see, no.
It's not the same way, and I did a hetero romance within one of my playthroughs, and it was just a lovely romantic scene with fireflies by a lake.
See, that's where my problem is like, if you're not going to have a similar interaction for the hetero people, and it's only, and even if you came up with the queer sex scene first, and then you have the hetero sex scene, you're like, oh, we need to make them match for asset reasons, or we just want to make them all very similar, so people play a similar story no matter what. if you're only including that because of the queer characters, regardless, it does feel homophobic. And that's not homophobic, the characters being like that. I mean, like, that's the developers being like, well, we kind of have to, wink at the camera, which is, it's homophobic. It's not like the same kind of homophobia where someone's going down the street screaming the F slur at you or hate criming you, but it is still homophobia.
It's creating a different experience for someone strictly based on their sexuality. And it's a very ham-fisted scene. It was blocky, it was full of tropes, and it was really, like, just unnecessary. Because it was a nice scene, and then you had them get walked in on, and then it suddenly became a, like, vaudeville sketch. And I'm just like, I'm not about it. It was just weird.
Yeah, well, that sucks, and I'm sorry you had to experience that. But we're going to move on to a happier game. I want to talk a little bit about, and I'm going to I can't really spoiler warn the title, because if you have or haven't played the game, you have no way of knowing this is a spoiler. I'm going to mention the title of the game and say that it has a queer romance, and then if you want to skip ahead, let's say 5 minutes, then you can avoid spoilers for this, but I'm just going to say I'm talking about the game Unpacking, which is an indie game. It takes about 4 hours to play, where you are literally unpacking someone's house. Like, that's like the premise. And the game moves through the stage of a person's life. So the first time you're unpacking a room, you're unpacking a child's bedroom. And as you're going through the game, you're going through different stages of this person's life. And it becomes very clear around when they're in their teenage, you start unpacking bras. And you're like, okay, so this person is a girl, is a woman. And then they go to college. And then after college, I think it's their first apartment. And then the second apartment, I think, I could be wrong, it could be the first apartment after college. But you see they're in a relationship and they've got some of their boyfriends' things in there. And they kind of, design-wise, clashes with each other. And then the next place, you're unpacking double the amount of panties, double the amount of bras, and you're like, and the gameplay is very clear. Like, you're only unpacking like 3 things of each, like 3 pairs of socks, 3 pairs of panties, just to get the point across. You don't want to spend an hour unpacking pairs of panties, but you unpack double of all that stuff, and you're thinking like, oh, okay, like you're unpacking, you were like unpacking your stuff before, less of it in a man's apartment, clearly less feminine, and now there's this very tasteful, I won't say it was pink or butterflies or whatever, but it was just a much more tasteful, something you'd expect lesbians to have. So it becomes very clear as the game progresses that this character has come out of the closet, the one you're following and unpacking for, and she's a lesbian. And she's found a partner. And then at the very end of the game, in case you weren't sure, they hammer the point forward by showing 2 old ladies watching the sunset at a table in their backyard after they've unpacked. And it's very sweet, and it really isn't ham-fisted at all. Like, it's literally just there to be like, this person figured themselves out. Like, it almost feels like the commentary is its lack of commentary. Like, it feels intentional. It feels like it's in there to make a statement, but its statement is that we have no statement.
And this is what good writing does, and good pacing and good progression. This is what happens when you have a good writing team working on your game and a wonderful concept. And like, that sounds just like a beautifully paced game and your perfect little, like, interactive novella almost.
Yeah, it's really, really sweet. And again, I'll say the bras and the panties aren't the only things that clue you in on this, but it was the first thing for me where I was like, oh, because usually you can choose where you start unpacking, but like the character that you're unpacking for has a few things that are in every vignette. Like a teddy bear, for example, or like a soundtrack or a book or something that's like always with her in every, that she's carried with her through her entire life. I'm sure you have stuff like that too. Like, I still have like plushies and stuff. So unpacking these things, and then suddenly you see like, oh, well, this is a different teddy bear. Oh, okay, but they got similar things, so they clearly have similar taste and similar vibes. So anyway, that's all I want to say, is that it's very sweet. And if this, I know I've spoiled the game, and it kind of makes it a little pointless to play knowing the twist, but also I can't really sell the game without spoiling the twist in this way. So anyway, let's move on to your next choice.
So these are all more moments of tenderness between some characters. I'm referencing Octopath Traveler and Octopath Traveler 2. Because obviously these games, Octo, there are 8 characters in your party, and there's a lot of, the one criticism the game has is that there's not really a connecting story. Each character is on their own journey. There are little moments, though, that if you have the right combination of party members, you can get little side scenes as you're playing, like going through a character's chapter. If you have, let's say, Therion and Elfin in the party at a certain time, you can get a prompt where you hit the button, you get a little side scene where these two characters are talking about what's happening in the story. And like, for instance, in Therion's chapter 1, they're breaking into a place, Therion's the thief, and someone asks, like, I feel so weird doing this, and like, they're like the cleric, and they're like, this is so odd, I'm not used to doing this, and Therion's like, this is just Tuesday for me, it's fine. So like, it's just a sweet little moment, completely just like little short stories between these two characters. But at the end of Therion's chapter 1, if you have the character Alphen, the apothecary, in your party, there's a moment where they're talking, and Alphen's this big, boisterous character, and Therion's this, like, quiet, reclusive thief, like, stick to his own kind of thing. And Alphen's like, oh, that was so fun, like, going on this adventure with you? Like, what do you normally do at the end of the day? Because I like to do that, like, and Therion's like, I like to go to the tavern. And Alphen's like, well, maybe I could join you sometime? And Therion, like, has, like, ... and it's like, I'll buy. And it's like, they're gay boys! They're such a cute couple, and from that moment on, right at the start of the game, I always have them in the party together, because it's like, you two are a thing. It's just my unofficial headcanon for these two characters that they just have a close connection.
That's about as queer as it gets to for a Japanese game. Like that's like a Japanese game saying like they're gay. They're gay for each other, and that's as much as we're gonna say, but that's as far as the Japanese game will go.
And also in the game, the cleric Ophelia and the hunter Hanet, they get a very close friendship that through these little side scenes gets developed as their stories go on. So we have like Therion and Alphen, who are kind of a same-sex couple in my head. Then you also have Hanet and Ophelia, who are also the same-sex couple within this party. So I'm like, I'm just pairing people off together. Matchmaker, that's me. And you also get a little bit of this in Octopath Traveler 2 with Temenos, the cleric in that game. He has a character in his story called Crick, who is a Templar knight, and they are kind of, Temenos is trying to solve a mystery, and he keeps running into Crick no matter where he's going, and Crick is a party member temporarily when you don't have a full party, and he is always interacting with Temenos, and the way they banter, and they kind of start off really hating each other, because Temenos is this, like, very smart, really cynical, like, academic, and Crick is this super believer who doesn't, like, blind faith, strong football player type guy. And they develop a wonderful fondness for one another. That's really beautiful to see them go from, like, Crick is initially, I think, assigned to, like, watch over Temenos so he stays out of trouble. And then Temenos is like, well, I'm going to go explore this. And Crick's like, wait, you can't. Fine, I'm coming with you. And it's just a delightful little story to see them play out. So in both of these games, we have little moments of queerness. It's not official. It's not part of the story in a big way. But there are moments that I'm like, wow, I was like, there are moments where I literally like started crying with the Crick and the Temenos story, because it was just so sweet and so tender. And sometimes a little bittersweet. And that's all I'll say to avoid spoilers, because you should definitely play Octopath Traveler 2, as well as Octopath Traveler 1. These are gorgeous, gorgeous games that really have a callback to the golden age of RPGs.
All right, well, we have a couple more games to talk about. You mentioned you want to talk about Dragon Quest, but maybe I was thinking, actually, since we veered off into headcanon territory, we could actually talk about Final Fantasy. And at this point, I'm going to say right now that I'm going to spoil the end of Rebirth. So if you do not want to hear any spoilers about Final Fantasy VII, whether the original game, because I haven't played the original game, but I've played to the end of Rebirth, and I know a few things from the original, but like, I'm going to spoil a lot of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So at this point, I think it's just time to nope out of the podcast. But I think you also wanted to talk about 15 as well, right, Graeme?
I have it's a very brief note about 15.
Well, let's start with that, and then we'll dive into Final Fantasy VII, which is all headcanon. But as far as I'm concerned, it's very strong headcanon.
With 15, it's a wonderful, like, boys trip, which is also what people criticize the game about. It's like, it's just a road trip with the boys, and it's like, and every Final Fantasy game isn't a road trip of some kind. More or less. But with Final Fantasy 15, you really get a close bond with all of these characters, and you get little offshoot moments with each of them. And there is a kind of way where you can kind of favor certain characters, and you can like go out of your way to do their side missions, go out of their way to engage with them. Like I have a little crush on Prompto because he is adorable and all the energy, but Ignis is also my cooking husband. And that's something a friend of ours has in common. We always talk about like cooking husband Ignis, and Gladio, of course, is the big butch guy. So it's like no matter what your vibe is, there's a boy for you in Final Fantasy 15.
It's kind of sweet, honestly.
It is, and it's really nice to see them go through this ultimately really dark journey together. But they're also just, it's kind of like the power of friendship. Against all odds, you come out on top. So. It is a wonderful story, and also just you get some little like homoerotic moments, which again, there's no outright romance in this game. This is friendship, but in my head it's like, yeah, but like you're driving around with your boys, you're going on all these adventures, like you develop fondness for these people. Proximity.
That's fair. What about Final Fantasy VII, Graeme?
So 7, I was really happy when they kept the Wall Market mission in Final Fantasy VII Remake, because that is an original component of the original Final Fantasy VII, and that's one of the most quintessential queer moments of video games from back then, because it was unheard of to think of a mission where you are actively disguising a male character as a female to infiltrate Corneo Manor. And it's something that's like, this seems out of place in this game. A JRPG of this vintage. It seems really, like, weird, but it's also one of the most famous missions from this game. Like, everyone knows this mission. If you know anything about Final Fantasy VII, you're like, there's a cross-dressing mission. You're like, absolutely right, there is. And your whole mission is to make Cloud the prettiest girl. And it's just fantastic that they updated it and made it everything I ever dreamed of in Remake. It's literally, I was screaming at my TV just in awe as it was happening. I was like, this is perfection. This is absolute queer video game perfection. And it was funny without being awkward, and it's insanely awkward for the record. Like, it's very uncomfortable.
For the characters, not for the audience.
But the audience, we're just having a great time. We're just living it up, and we're like, absolutely, this is everything we want. And it's so well written, and the voice acting is impeccable for it. It's such a wonderful moment of queerness in this game that, again, is pretty dark, pretty serious, but you got this moment of levity, and it's one of my favorite moments in the whole game.
Well, you mentioned voice acting, and I just want to say something is that as a trans woman who's tried to voice train, and I failed miserably at it, so I just let my voice be what it is. I find it pretty feminine despite being deep and still a little masculine, but Cloud doesn't change his voice when he's playing. I don't know. Does Cloud even have a name when he's cross-dressing?
I don't remember. Honestly, it's a bit of a blur. I was too taken, like, just getting awe of them. Like, oh, this is fantastic. I kind of like blacked out a little bit in that moment because I was just in gay boy bliss at that time.
Well, in the scene where he's trying to impress Don Corneo, when they finally gets into the mansion, and he's there with Tifa and Aerith, and Corneo picks Cloud, by the way. Like, his top choice is Cloud. And I'm pretty sure at first Cloud passes completely. Like, he's like, Cloud is a woman, there's no man here. Then Cloud speaks. And I'm not sure what context the developers had or the dub team had. But Corneo doesn't react to Cloud's deep voice. And speaking as a trans woman who's I went to the Hershey store when I was in NYC last year. And when I went to the cash register, there was a cute guy that saw me, and he smiled at me. And as soon as I spoke, it was clear to me from his look, because his jaw dropped a little. His smile didn't drop, but his look died just a little bit inside, and I could tell that he was like, oh, you're a trans woman. Like, because I find otherwise, for the most part, I feel like if I carry myself well, I pass, but my voice doesn't. And I'm to be honest, I'm fine with that. And I think anyone who doesn't want to voice train shouldn't have to. But in the real world, a lot of men find it strange when a woman has a deep voice. And so the fact that Corneo has absolutely zero reaction to Cloud's deep, like, no, No. No. Like, Cloud doesn't say much, but when he does talk, he does not raise his pitch. He doesn't do anything to it. And Corneo is still very much on board. And I just want to note that, like, I think it's funny that Corneo either is bisexual and into cross-dressing men, or what I find more likely, because he's a complete creep, is that he's into trans women. And I just want to say that we stan Corneo.
Corneo is a queer icon.
He's an ally.
He's like, yeah, like...
He's a creep, don't get me wrong, but he's an ally that's a creep.
Don Corneo is a character you love to hate, but at the same time, Don Corneo says ally.
Yeah, he says trans rights, so he may treat women like shit, but he treats trans women like shit too. So
he's an equal opportunity shithead.
Yeah, and I'm not saying this is a good thing at all, but in the context, I just think it's very interesting. And again, I don't feel like the developers didn't think that hard about it. But because of what's there on screen, my headcanon is that Corneo's into trans women, and he's all-inclusive.
Yeah, there's definitely things to talk about in terms of how queer characters are represented in video games, but that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah, I did kind of veer off topic a little bit. I really, really want to talk about Cloud and Sephiroth, and I want to talk about Tifa and Aerith, because my headcanon gaydar was going off the charts for these two characters. First off, Sephiroth wants Cloud bad. There's a scene, one shot, in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and I think it's repeated a couple times, where Sephiroth comes really, really close to the camera, and he goes, "I'm waiting, Cloud." And I'm just like, oh, he wants Cloud so bad. Like, he just keeps showing up, and Cloud's just... I don't know if Cloud's into Sephiroth, but Sephiroth is into Cloud. And I know there's story components there that are going on that are probably even beyond me, because I haven't finished the story yet for the third part, but... Like, I think Sephiroth wants Cloud really bad. Like, he goes out of his way to make sure he's there with his, big sword and his little gay wing.
And there's a lot of queer coding in the way that Sephiroth presents, not only the style choice, but on a very, very surface level fact, if you just see the character, you see long hair, you see like the deep V in the like showing off the chest, like this. There's a lot of, you see leather straps. Like there's a lot of queerness in how Sephiroth presents, and a lot of the performance also has a nod to a lot of villains, specifically in Disney movies, but in other movies as well. There's a kind of weird queerness about villains because something being a little off. Obviously Sephiroth is very menacing and is very, scheming, and there's a lot beneath the surface about Sephiroth, but how it presents is this kind of elegant villain who there is a undeniable queerness about.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that Disney villain comparison is really apt because the game came out in the 90s when those Disney movies were coming out too. He's
very Jafar, he's very Scar, he's very exaggerated, and like this is all a lot of characteristics that are very, very queer. I don't know why queer people are overdramatic. It just happens. And I mean, look at me. Very dramatic.
Yeah, it's true. But yeah, I think he definitely wants Cloud a little. I don't know if Cloud's into it. I think Cloud's sick of Sephiroth's shit. Maybe they had a relationship in the past and Cloud's just over him. But Sephiroth cannot stop carrying a torch. Again, all headcanon. I don't have all the backstory. I've not played Crisis Core. But for now, I'm just going to live in my silly little bubble where Sephiroth just wants Cloud bad and will not give him up for any reason, including killing his little darling, Aerith, which is what my next point leads into, actually, because I do think Tifa and Aerith are a little too ready to U-Haul. So for anyone who doesn't know, this joke is that it's a U-Haul lesbian relationship is when two lesbians meet and they immediately move in together. It's called U-Hauling. It's not necessarily always like a thing that happens or it's accurate, but it's kind of become a meme.
It also does very much happen. I've known lesbian couples who U-Hauled within like a month of meeting. And I was like, well, there it is.
There it is. And it's pretty much till the day they die.
They have since gotten married, moved to a farm, and live outside of, like off in the country, and they're, very happy together. So
they've gone full cottagecore is what you're telling me.
Exactly.
Okay. That's you hauling to the max. And I think if Tifa and Aerith could have a happy ending, and not in the sexual way, don't get any wrong ideas, they would have their happy ending because every time they're on screen together, it's just a little more friendly than the average girl talk. Because it's not really about Cloud. They always say they're going to talk about Cloud, but I don't... For two women that are competing for Cloud's attention, they really like each other and really don't seem to have any issue fighting over Cloud.
They are going to be the two ladies who are sitting on the porch of the seventh heaven, watching the sunset.
Yes, in an alternate timeline where they both live to a ripe old age, 100%. But in Rebirth, at the very end, and this is where I'm going to spoil, is that when Aerith dies, because I mean, I'm not going to explain why she dies, but um, Tifa doesn't really say much after that. There's not too many cutscenes. Most of them are with Cloud and Aerith, but and again, I've seen someone joke. I think this was on I forget what the YouTube channel is called, but where they do this parody game trailers, honest trailers. Thank you. Sorry about that. But in honest trailers, they called it Schrodinger's Aerith, so we're not really sure if she's dead or not, because as soon as she dies, we see another timeline Aerith come in and just be like, "I'm here now." But only Cloud can see this Aerith. So in the final cutscene, where they're all ready to fly off to what is I assume Wutai, but I'm not 100% certain if that's where they're going. But they're going off into the sunset to the next game for the next thing. The same way the last game ended. They're just like going off. So Tifa doesn't say anything. She's just beside herself. All the other characters are kind of like, yeah, we're sad, but we got shit to do. Like we got a Sephiroth to kill and a planet to save. And Tifa's just bawling. Red's a little beside himself too, but like Tifa is just like completely done in. And I mean, there's other sequences too, but every time that the Cloud has a chance to pick one of the two ladies, he really doesn't. They kind of they could be bi for all I know, but I do think that I think that Tifa's got a thing for Aerith, and maybe Aerith has a little bit of a thing for Tifa, because I just do.
Yeah. And I think that there is something to be said about like, the closeness of female friendships as well, like friendships and relationships, is there is a kind of, whether there's sexual tension or romantic intention or not, it can be very close and it can be very...
I mean, they could just be friends, for sure. They could just be friends.
It could feel like Tifa is losing a sister at that point. 100%. There's a lot, and that's the beauty of narrative. You can interpret it all sorts of different ways.
Remember, these are all headcanon. None of this is confirmed. And honestly, whether you are queer and you believe that this headcanon is true, or you're straight and you don't, like it or any flavor in between, it's completely fine. As we're just talking here about characters that are a little queer coded, so that when a queer person plays these games or watches these stories and experiences them, they might see something there that other people don't. Maybe the developers didn't even intend to be there. Who knows? I don't know how many queer people are working on these games, especially these Japanese games where queerness is a little more still taboo than it is here.
So that's actually a perfect transition into the last game I wanted to talk about, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dragon Quest XI, Echoes of an Elysian Age.
I think it's Elusive Age. I think you're right.
Sure. Dragon Quest XI has two characters that just give me queer vibes 100%. The one is Eric, who was one of your first party members, and you two meet because you get thrown in prison and you are sharing a cell, or you're like across the hall from Eric, and then he finds out you are the like hero of light or whatever the title is, I don't remember. And from that moment on, he is just your best friend, and he's just like, "Oh, I'm following you. You're the hero who's, supposed to save us all, and I'm just right there." And the way the friendship goes, I'm like, "Oh, Eric's my husband. 100% Eric's my husband. He is a great party member. He is always right there for you, and he likes the hero a little too much." And I'm like, "Hi, Eric. How you doing?" Like, there's definitely some romantic tension there that I read. Again, speaking of headcanon, speaking of interpretations, this could just be like loyalty, friendship. We're facing off against demons and monsters together and overcoming all these odds. It could just be the bond you develop over the course of going on an adventure, but I see a little bit more. There's just a little bit of that extra fondness, which sometimes is a little more elusive in male-male friendships as compared to like female friendships. You see a lot more of that intimacy, whereas like when you're hanging with the guys, there's always this kind of shadow of that's gay, bro. Especially for when you're in straight male friendships, there can be that echo or the shadow of like, is this gay? The game never does anything. They're just like, Eric loves the hero, and that's the end of the story. Yeah. And I'm like, yes, exactly, and that's why I love Eric. Eric's amazing. But there's also a character in it there is one interpretation of this character, and it is that he is a flaming gay man. That is the only interpretation. It's the character Sylvango. he is practically a meme, but we talked about Don Corneo being a queer icon. Sylvango does it all with glitter. He is a performer at the circus who is, like, has his own shadowy background that you find out later, but, like, also gets a little too fascinated with the hero, but not so much romantic. It seems more in a mentorship way. And Sylvango just oozes, like, just iconic, memeable moments. There's a moment where he has, the world has gone to shit. You're trying to recollect your party members. And when you find Sylvango, he has got all these young men around him that are all like, they're all suffering, so they joined my troupe who are going to bring smiles and joy to the world. And he dresses the hero up in the outfit that all of them are wearing. And you literally walk this parade of men who are all wearing feathers and glitter, and it changes the way you walk, so it's like a dance. So you walk through the landscape essentially as the Pride Parade. You literally have a moment where you walk the Pride Parade to a town. And I'm like, Sylvango, if he shows up to a horse race, his horse, for some reason, has, like, just huge pink feathers on it. I'm like, I love this. He's always calling you darling, and he's got this super gay voice. And, like, I'm like, there is one interpretation of this man. He is gay, and I'm here for it. And especially in a JRPG where you don't normally get characters like that. It's great. It's wonderful. I love it.
Well, we ended on a very wholesome note where the headcanon is more likely to be true. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't call that a headcanon at that point. I would say that the headcanon is that he's straight, if anything. But, this has been a great time, Graeme, but I'm going to have to call it because it has been a while. But thank you so much for coming on. I enjoyed hearing your insights, and I look forward to having you back on. I also didn't say this last time because it was the first episode and I was super nervous, but I do want to have Amy Lynn back on as well. I plan to say this to all my guests because I love all my guests. I just am figuring out this format and figuring it out. But anyway, back to my thank you. Graeme, thank you so much for coming on. It was, again, a pleasure to hear from you and your headcanon insights and your rants.
It's great to be on the show, and I look forward to coming back because I love having opinions and talking about them. So, and if we're talking about video games, I'm right there.
Me too. That's why I started the podcast. All I want to do is talk about gay things and video games, and guess what? You can do both at the same time.
Remarkable.
Anyway, thank you so much, and we'll catch you all next week.
Happy gaming.